What is up, everybody? What is up? Sorry for the slightly tardy start today, but welcome to the latest episode of the Insomniacs Livestream with me, your host, Dr. Andrew Kim, MD. Applauding to myself, applauding to myself. For those of you who are joining in for the first time, again, my name is Dr. Kim. I am a board certified psychiatrist. Thank you for those of you who are subscribers to my channel. I appreciate your support, always tuning in for these late night shows. For those of you who can't sleep like myself and who are a bunch of insomniacs. So for those of you who aren't familiar with me, please, please subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it very much. And always remember, I get so many emails and so many comments asking for personal medical advice. Please realize I'm just going to get this disclaimer out of the way. I am not your personal physician. I'm not going to be able to answer direct, customized, personalized medical recommendations for you. That is meant for you and your own personal physician, nurse practitioner, clinician, therapist, etc. So please understand, this is for educational purposes. This is for entertainment purposes. And that's what we're doing here today. Okay, so I appreciate people reaching out and my heart goes out. It's just I cannot give you direct medical advice, so please keep that in mind. So anyways, on to today's show. Today we are talking about ADHD, or some people want to call it ADD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or attention deficit disorder. So what we're going to be talking about, I'm going to preface this by saying, let's get this out of the way as well, that I may be saying some things today that might offend some people. I'm going to say some things that probably are going to offend people who might be part of ADHD or ADD advocacy groups. And I'm going to say, it's okay. It's okay for us to have differing opinions, and it's okay for us to disagree. And it's okay that if I ruffle some feathers, because people can ruffle my feathers sometimes. So that's the beauty of America, is that we have the freedom of speech. We have the freedom to have differing opinions. But I may say a few things today that may come across as harsh, that may come across as critical, and that may question the paradigms of ADD itself in terms of how we conceptualize it, how we go about diagnosing it, how I see the problematic ways that we go about treating it here in America and across the globe. So I want to warn you, right? The last disclaimer I'm going to give before we jump into it is what I'm going to get into today, and some of my critical comments is not to disparage people who are struggling and suffering with cognitive symptoms, struggling with ADD. Okay. I do believe that there is a form of, severe inattention and executive cognitive dysfunction that our current diagnostic manual, the DSM-5, calls ADD. And I do believe those symptoms, when severe enough, can cause distress internally and cause dysfunction and impact work and school life, personal life, social interactions, etc. I am not a disbeliever in that. Now, what I am going to be very critical about, for those of you who are going to hang in with me during this episode, I am very critical about the fact that how we've designed the concept and the paradigm of ADD is humongously, just hugely stupid, in my opinion. Okay. I think it's a diagnosis with the current setup with the diagnostic criteria that lacks precision. Honestly, I think the entire paradigm lacks validity, and describing a set of random non-specific symptoms than an actual disease process. I'm going to be very highly critical of that. I'm going to be highly critical about the methodology in America that we use to diagnose ADD, in my opinion, misdiagnose more than accurately diagnose. And I'm going to say that right now. We're going to start it off spicy. I'm going to say we misdiagnose ADD far more than we accurately diagnose it, in my opinion. That's my personal belief. You could choose to disagree with me. The context I have for that is that I know that anecdote doesn't equal truth, but look, I work at a company, and again, these are my opinions, not my company's opinions, that works directly with colleges and universities. And I'm doing thousands of visits per year with college age students, undergrad, grad school. And let me tell you, it's concerning how many college students are entering college with a pre-existing diagnosis of ADD when I asked them how their previous clinicians went about diagnosing it. I'm going to tell you right now, vast majority of the time, it was diagnosed in a piss poor way, and more than likely inaccurate. And when we go through our own diagnostic process, I have concerns that many of them do not have ADD, even in the current shape and form that we conceptualize ADD. And we'll get into that in a little bit. I also have concerns about how much money is in the industry of peddling the narrative that everyone has ADD. It's a in my opinion, billion with a B, $billion industry. And we'll get into that. And if you don't believe me and you think that I'm full of conspiracies, we'll see. I'm going to show you concrete examples of where there is so much profiteering happening off of the fear-mongering or playing to the insecurities of our society to basically promote misattribution of wanting everyone to identify with ADD for the sake of multi-billion-dollar profit, in my opinion. Okay? And there's also problems with the research that we use and some of the research that ADD advocacy groups tout as quote unquote evidence and hard evidence that this is such a quote unquote underdiagnosed diagnosis that people like me who might bring up concern. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't people who struggle with cognitive and executive dysfunction and inattention. I didn't say that. That's why I gave that disclaimer in the beginning. I'm just saying that there are huge numbers, swaths of people who are misdiagnosed as having ADD, but we live in such a society where somehow raising scientific scrutiny and skepticism equals you're against us. And it becomes this us against them mentality. And it's like, why can't we have a conversation where we can appreciate two concepts that coexist, that there is likely some kind of disease process and that causes executive dysfunction and inattention. But I also believe that there is probably an accurate statement to say that many people are misdiagnosed with that for various reasons. So Dennis joins us. Dennis is a regular listener. Dennis says, my first question here is, are we talking about adult onset ADHD, which is what I typically think of when hearing adult ADHD, and which I don't believe exists, or adult ADHD as just in an adult with ADHD? I'm going to say we're going to talk about a little of both. Okay. I think I have much more criticism of adult onset ADHD. So for my own personal bias, I will say I am super skeptical and highly doubtful of anyone who indicates that they simply have adult onset ADHD and that the ADHD was not present earlier in their life in childhood. I think especially in those cases, Dennis, I am highly, highly, highly doubtful and skeptical. And again, not coming from a condescending mindset, but more of a mindset of, I'm going to tell that patient, I'm worried that you're exhibiting misattribution. And again, with empathy, saying, I understand you're trying to make the puzzle pieces fit. You want to understand your struggles. You want to put a name or an identity on what's causing these problems. But I'm going to tell them you're barking up the wrong tree. And I don't know that enough clinicians do that. I'm not trying to sound self-righteous that I'm somehow better. I'm just saying I know for a fact that there are many clinicians that are either too busy, too burnt out, feel pressured because they just got to see so many patients per hour. They're not going to sit there and have that difficult, and I'm going to say it, tension-filled, conflict-filled conversation, because you are going to inevitably disappoint a patient, upset a patient, make a patient defensive by setting a boundary and saying the healthy thing and the actual clinically helpful thing to that patient, if you're a true physician who's taken a Hippocratic oath that you are supposed to be there to help and do no harm to your patient, to say pursuing that and investing all your eggs in that basket may end up being more of a detriment than a help to you if you're going to then ignore other potential causes of inattention, concentration issues, working memory issues, etc. Okay. I do believe there are folks who have childhood onset ADD. I actually don't necessarily believe in the H. I'm gonna say, personally speaking, I think that actually has not even been a well-validated symptom cluster in the ADHD paradigm. I really don't. I think it's really more, I personally feel it's more accurate to call it ADD, even from childhood. And for those who have it from childhood onwards, I do believe that there are going to be folks who have some type of executive dysfunction, inattention, disease, or disorder that will persist from childhood and have kind of a waxing, waning, fluctuating course over the course of their lifetime. I think that's a more accurate statement. I could believe that. And I do believe there's enough research to support that. I will say there is controversy. There is some controversy, though, even with childhood onset ADHD that persists into adulthood. What percentage of adults will still have the same level of severity of ADD in adulthood compared to childhood? I will say it's murky, and yet even there, statistics may get manipulated by various parties, and I think those various parties have different motives. I think advocacy groups are doing it with with good intentions because they want to raise awareness. Larger numbers look sexier. Let's be real. Okay. I mean, look, in the previous episodes we even talked about kidnapping rates, right? Like some of these advocacy groups who talk about like saving children, doing detective work for children. It's not going to sound as sexy to get donations and funding for a very good cause when numbers are low. So even there is some manipulation of the truth. Like we talked about how they said anyone with a missing persons report for X amount of hours, they would just throw into the kidnapping category, right? I mean, so there is manipulation sometimes with good intentions. Is that the right thing to do? I'm not sure. And I also think there's manipulation due to industry motives to promote a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think that's a travesty because you know what that does? It causes discomfort, qualms from clinicians who are trying to do good by their patients, and it leaves a sour taste in everyone's mouth, and it screws people who truly have legitimate ADD. Okay, because if anything, it creates chaos, concerns about the over-prescribing and increased prevalence of stimulant medications, controlled substance medications that do have health consequences that always get downplayed. They do get downplayed. That's my personal opinion. That is increasing at an alarming rate in the United States. And again, I'm going to get criticized for even that statement. People say, Dr. Kim's an idiot. If anything, ADD continues to be underdiagnosed because of the stigma. I will agree. I'll acquiesce. I do believe ADD is underdiagnosed, I would say, in lower socioeconomic demographics, and possibly in some minority demographics because of cultural issues, limited access to care, limited access to good care. Let's be even more specific. So don't get me wrong. I think the answer is nuanced. I do believe there is an underdiagnosis in certain demographics. But in my opinion, once you get past that and you're in that middle class, upper class status socioeconomically speaking, I think that in those demographics, you have, in my opinion, a huge percentage of misdiagnosis for various reasons. Some might even say overdiagnosis. So I think even this concept of people who say there's overdiagnosing, oh, they're idiots, or people who say there's underdiagnosing, no, it's probably a nuanced answer. Let's be realistic. I think there are going to be some demographics where there's under, and there's some demographics where there's way, way more misattribution and misdiagnosing that's occurring. Okay, so that's kind of how I'll answer that. So let's get into this. I was busy today. I'm glad I had the motivation to come on the live stream, not like last year where I did like 1 or 2 episodes and I lost my steam. So I didn't have time to prepare a lot of graphics. But so first, let's just talk about what am I talking about the concerning rise in ADHD prevalence in the United States. Okay, recent NIH surveys, have indicated that point prevalence, an increasing concern by researchers and aggregated surveys and studies are showing that in 2022, so it's a little outdated, so who knows what the more recent stats are, but in 2022, children and adolescents in the United States, 1 out of 9, listen to that number. Listen to what I am saying right now, people. 1 out of 9 United States children have gotten a diagnosis of ADHD. Let me do this right now. Yeah, stop the presses. 1 out of 9. I'm sorry. I know I'm being melodramatic here, but that's insane. That's insane if you're telling me 1 out of every 9 people, because they're people, they're kids that are gonna grow into adulthood. You're saying 1 out of 9 people have ADD. If that doesn't make you pause, and if that doesn't make you stop and be skeptical, I don't know what to tell you. Okay. And then when you speak with folks out there, again, you're going to get variable responses. You're going to get some folks who respond like me saying, what the hell is going on? What the hell are we doing? And then you're going to get other folks who are going to say, oh, please, you're not in the know. Like, you've had your head in the sand. This is what we need. We need, more diagnosing. We need more recognition. I didn't say we don't need advocacy. I didn't say that we shouldn't be advocates for people who have struggles that need to get appropriate treatment. Did I say those things? I'm just saying I'm concerned that we are now saying, and we're okay with the fact that we're saying that 1 out of 9 kids in the United States have ADD. That is a problem. Okay. If you rewind to 5, 7, 10 years ago, and again, the criticism is going to be higher recognition. We're just more aware of it. Okay, really? Okay, trust me. It's not like in the 1990s and in the early 2000s that ADD was not a big business, that ADD was not something that we weren't assessing for. Okay, so yeah, I understand that with increased awareness, less stigma, we should see some increase in the rates and prevalence, the incidence of diagnosis, prevalence, etc. But traditionally, the rates have been somewhere around 2 to 3%. Okay. And you're telling me now 1 in 9. Something is going on, guys. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. The stats and the public health data are out there for you to go look at. I'm not using hyperbole. This is what we're talking about. It's concerning to me. That's why you saw on my playlist, on one of my playlists, I'm saying there is an epidemic occurring. And I guess it depends on your viewpoint, an epidemic of misdiagnosing, an epidemic of overdiagnosing, an epidemic of overprescribing. Agree or disagree, whatever you want. I'm just sharing my opinion here. This is America. I have the freedom to speak my mind. And I'm going to be a little spicy today. I do believe there is this hidden, silent, growing epidemic of this problem of ADD in our society. Okay? And for those of you who joined late, again, I'm going to say it again because I think people will misinterpret me. I am not saying that ADD does not exist. I'm not saying those with ADD do not struggle. I have seen it myself in 13 years. When I have a patient who has ADD, and I'm confident in it, sometimes it's murky, but when I have those confident cases, good Lord, it can be like night and day. I mean, night and day, the difference when someone has their symptoms optimally controlled versus unchecked. I mean, it could be like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of phenomenon. And it is one of the most satisfying things as a clinician to be able to assist a patient with, because it's so palpably different and so remarkably different when symptoms are better controlled when they're versus unchecked. So trust me, this isn't I'm so much smarter and I know this fact and people don't realize this growing up. No, I'm just saying someone who even appreciates when it's treated correctly and there's such a life change, this is a problem. This is a problem, guys. 1 out of 9? Come on. So let's talk. What do I think is feeding into this? I think it is multifaceted. So let's get into one of the facets. I do think it's concerning how we go about diagnosing ADD. Because there is no gold standard. There is no absolute certain diagnostic test out there for ADD. There is no brain scan. I know people are going to say, oh, look, I trained at the Brigham and Women's. I know they're one of the most premier institutions, academically speaking, in the field with like functional MRI, fMRI imaging. Okay. But even if you ask them, like, yeah, they can see correlating keywords, correlating patterns on functional MRI in folks who have ADD versus those who don't. But if I said, hey, put your reputation on the line, I'm going to give you 100 fMRI scans. I got 3 hidden cases in there of confidently diagnosed ADD. I want you to sniff that out with very high accuracy. No one's going to put their license on the line for that. Because again, when you have the benefit of having the clinical context and interviewing, and then you correlate it with images, you'll find patterns, maybe, and you'll draw some extrapolations from those patterns. But if we could definitively diagnose ADD blind by just giving someone an fMRI or some kind of imaging test, trust me, hospitals are not altruistic. They would charge you just like they charge you for stents in your heart, for knee replacements, for hip replacements, for whatever procedure, for MRIs and CAT scans. They say, hey, come to our diagnostic clinic, come in and out, we'll scan you, we'll let you know if you have ADD. Do you see that happening? I'm sorry, I know that's crass, guys, but I'm just being realistic. We had something that was as wonderful as sliced bread. Trust me, profits would be being made, and they would be milking the hell out of it right now. There is no standard imaging test for ADD. There is no definitive brainwave EEG test for ADD. Again, you're going to say, well, I talked to the psychologist and they hooked them up to this neurofeedback machine with electrodes and they saw these correlating alpha waves and et cetera waves. Yeah, again, you can correlate when you have the benefit of context and you already kind of have a bias in a sense that you think this person has ADD, and then you find some correlative patterns and you could extrapolate. But again, I said blindly here, let's have you look at a few folks, and I'm not going to tell you which ones are having cognitive executive dysfunction because of sleep deprivation, depression, substance use, ADD. Good luck. Find the ones that are pure ADD. Give me a break. Give me an absolute break. They're not going to be able to do it. Same thing. If they could, they'd profiteer. There are people, I'm laughing because there's people who are profiteering off of it right now, acting like they can, and they're just ripping people off. I'm going to tell you right now, they're just ripping people off. Just absolutely ripping people off. They are. There is no imaging test. There's no definitive brain test. There's no blood test. There's no genetic test. People will say, whoa, Dr. Kim, there's no genetic test? What are you talking about? I read on all these ADD advocacy sites. Oh, there's a genetic link. My mother has it, my aunt has it, my grandmother has it, my uncle has it, my brother has it, and now I have it too. Honestly, it doesn't move the needle for me. Find me one good piece of literature, definitive piece of literature, well-run study that says we have a strong genetic causality risk factor that we've identified. Nope. Sorry. You're going to find me 15 journals. I'm saying none of them are good. Closest thing we have to having a strong, definitive genetic link in the field of psychiatry are things like bipolar disorder, even more than schizophrenia. So trust me, ADD, not even close to the top of that list in saying we have definitive genetic risk factors, genetic genes that are identified. Nope. Sorry. Okay. Anyone who does has an agenda. They want to be famous. They're getting funding from ADD advocacy groups. They're getting funding from, pharma that has ADD, treatments on the market already and want to fund the narrative. I'm not saying we should stop that research. I'm just saying we don't right now. That's what I'm saying. Again, balance. We don't, so we don't. So what do we do? So if I'm saying all this negative stuff, like how do we go about diagnosing ADD at this point in the year 2025 when we have all these advances in the fields of medicine, et cetera? We still do one of two things or a combo of two things: interview-based, observational-based. So interview/observation and collecting information from people that know the person. What's up, D77? What's up, SNCS? And the other is neuropsychological or neuropsychiatric testing, like a battery of standardized tests done in a systematized fashion to rule in and rule out other causalities and other factors that could potentially cause executive dysfunction, inattention, working memory problems, etc. Now, here's the deal. right? Neither one of those are really great gold standards either. Okay. But let's talk about the interview-based, observational-based methodology. Okay. Problem is, you're going to find psychologists, you're going to find psychiatrists, you're going to find family medicine doctors that are in primary care that are going to say, oh, yeah, I know how to diagnose ADD. What's Dr. Kim talking about? I use a modified Conners. I use a adult self-report questionnaire, the ASRS for ADD. Yeah, I know. I know all these. I know them like the back of my hand. And I'm going to tell you right now, all of these tools, fancy tools, are non-specific and have a bunch of symptoms that could or could not be from ADD. They're not specific to ADD. There's not one symptom on these checklists and survey inventories that are unique, or the other term is pathognomonic, to ADD. Here's an example. I'm gonna just flip. I'm gonna read it just so that you know I'm not making up. I'm gonna read several of the questions on what's considered a very routine, standard symptom checklist inventory that people use for screening, the adult ADHD self-report scale. Okay, very similar to the questions that are going to be on a Conners. Here's some of the questions, and the responses are going to be marked off from responses from the patient as never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often. Okay. How often do you have difficulty getting things in order when you have to do a task that requires organization? How often do you have problems remembering appointments or obligations? When you have a task that requires a lot of thought, how often do you avoid or delay getting started? How often do you feel overly active and compelled to do things like you're driven by a motor? How often do you have difficulty keeping your attention when you're doing boring or repetitive work? I want to emphasize that last one. Just listen to what I just said. How often do you have difficulty keeping your attention when you're doing boring or repetitive work? Me, you know why? Because I'm human. I'm much more interested and can pay attention more when I'm fascinated by something and I'm interested in something and I'm having fun and I'm enjoying something. I think it would be weird to say I don't have any challenges there. And again, I'm being a little sarcastic, right? Because it says never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often. So you can answer it with nuance. But the point I'm getting at is listen to some of the questions that I just asked you. Do you have troubles with being on time for appointments? Do you have troubles getting started with tasks that require a lot of effort and organization? Do you have trouble paying attention when something's not interesting and boring? Think about what I said. Are those things absolutely unique and specific and can only happen in this paradigm called ADD? Come on. That could come from a lot of different things, called being human, being tired and sleep deprived, right? And again, I'm not diminishing ADD. I'm just criticizing the methodology of how we diagnose it. And again, look, obviously, if you are a decent clinician, you don't just read a checklist and you don't just tell a patient to fill out a survey and you just go by that as the Bible and scripture and just say, okay, you said yes to enough things, you have ADD. Trust me when I say there are plenty of clinics and clinicians, that's what they do. They ask it out loud, they have it fill them out. Well, said yes to enough things, let's give you a stimulant. And trust me, it happens. Anyone who says it doesn't, BS. And we'll get into, I'll show you proof that it happens. I'll show you proof. I'll show you that it's not conspiracy. It's not me just being overly critical, me being an a-hole. I'll show you in a few minutes. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay. It's a problem, right? And yes, you will have good clinicians who will say, look, I'm going to get to need to know you. Visit one. I'm not going to just diagnose it because you said yes to a handful of things. I want to see you for several visits over several months. I want to get to understand the nuances. I want to rule out and make sure that it's not anxiety causing cognitive issues, which it can. It's not depression causing cognitive issues, which it can. That you don't have some other type of learning, difficulty. It's not substance use. It's not this. I mean, you got to rule out all these things. You got to take everything in a holistic picture to make sure that you're ruling out other plausible, explainable causes, because there's going to be so many potential ones. You want to know, kind of like Dennis was saying, is this something that stemmed from early on in childhood and has persisted steadily throughout your life, or at the very least fluctuated and waxed and waned over your life? Or is this brand new? You're saying to me this is the first time ever at age 27 you now feel that you have ADD, right? So it's problematic in terms of how we go about surveying and asking these questions. You're supposed to also try to get information from corroborative, collaborative, parties, right? I mean, speaking with family members, partners, if they're a child, teachers, etc., who are observing them in multiple settings. But let's be real. In adulthood, at least, I'm not going to say for child and adolescent psychiatry, they're better at it than adult psychiatrists. I'm going to say that right now. So, adult psychiatrists, they don't do that. Come on, they don't do that. You're lucky sometimes if you're in the initial visit, which is usually supposed to be about an hour. You're lucky if you're in there for 30 minutes sometimes. And then for your follow-up visits, man, you're lucky if you're in there for 9 minutes face to face. Okay, they're not scrounging and scouring and collecting info from your partners and from your coworkers and this and that. Like, unless you're paying a cash only psychiatrist and you're paying them $250, $300, $400 an hour, and they have the luxury to sit around and do that. If you were going to a traditional hospital run clinic, hospital, a group practice that's like a well-oiled machine, trust me when I say they're just going to interview you, they're going to eyeball you, and then they're going to do their best to try to come to a conclusion. Some are not going to do their best. They're just going to read these surveys and they're going to diagnose you. Okay. The other methodology, right, is testing, pursuing neuropsychiatric, neuropsychological testing. And I will say, I feel that if you can get some testing done, it is very beneficial oftentimes to give you more evidence for or against a concern for ADD. Now, here's the problem, right? Even testing itself is not 100% definitive. Okay. It usually is helpful when you're on one of the two extremes, okay? Meaning when you get testing done and your results come back totally within the normal average bell curve of everything, then okay, you don't have ADD. Boom, done. You need to figure out what else might be causing your problems. That's where it's helpful. It's also helpful when, you're off the charts, your standard deviation below or multiple standard deviation below in multiple areas, and you do have some kind of inattention, executive dysfunction problem that shows you're objectively against normal bell curves of people around your age, similar educational background. Yeah, you clearly have problems. So now clinically correlate that with what you're doing in an interview observational basis with your clinician, but you got a problem. Okay, again, helpful. Where it's problematic still, and where testing is not perfect either, is that when you get those equivocal answers, you will get results that say, you're not off the charts having problems, but you're also not quite within the normal range. So they'll write you this elaborate report that basically says, talk to your clinician and see what they think. And that's frustrating, right? If you were on a long wait list and you invested time, money, energy to take those elaborate tests. Now, what should those tests look like? We'll be brief here, but look, neuropsych testing goes beyond the surveys that I mentioned, all right? So when I ask my patients and they say, hey, how were you diagnosed? Were you diagnosed based off interview and observation primarily, or did you actually get some neuropsych testing? Inevitably, I get a bunch of people who say, oh, yeah, I got tested. I said, okay, I don't stop there. Here's my follow-up question. Tell me what the testing was like. I say, the clinic handed me this piece of paper and I answered the survey and I was done in 10 minutes. I say, okay, that's not testing. Oh, they made me hop on this website and I took some tests where it said, click this little dot when it's, wherever you see it. And I had to chase this dot and click it. And they said, when you see this pattern, press the space bar. When you see this one, refrain from pressing it. I said, okay, and how long were you doing that for? Like 20 minutes. And I say, okay, sorry to tell you, none of those were actually neuropsych testing. You took some elements of neuropsych testing, and they pulled out maybe 20 minutes worth or 10 minutes worth, etc., but you didn't do a full battery of testing. So you got the shortcut version. So I have to break it to people. Oftentimes they think they got tested because there isn't a lot of knowledge about this out there to the lay public about what it should look like. What it should really look like is typically, I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but like 90 something percent of the time, it's typically done by a psychologist. Rarely, I do see some psychiatrists or physicians who are doing this, but I'd say most of the time, these are done by psychologists who specialize in testing, okay? Psychologist will come in two flavors, either a PhD or a PsyD, P-S-Y and the letter D. And typically you go see them, and for visit one, you'll do an interview. You probably talk for about an hour. For more thorough ones, they might have you come back and you do a couple of interviews. And again, if they're thorough, they're also going to collect information from someone who knows you well, a spouse, a parent, family member, etc. If it's a child, a teacher. And then once that is collected, then you'll come back for a follow-up visit where you do the actual testing. And in my opinion, even on an efficient, shorter end of the spectrum type of testing, maybe it's going to be about 2 hours, okay? I would say, I don't necessarily believe it has to be this elaborate, but I've seen some thorough ones that are 4 hours, 5 hours, okay? So, Carrie, thanks for joining, Carrie, who's also a regular listener. Carrie says, have you heard of Roger McFillin? He is a prominent psychologist on Twitter and with a top podcast. He's anti-psychiatry and believes ADHD isn't real. You should check out his Twitter. Well, I'm sad to hear that he's anti-psychiatry, but I'll have to check that out, Carrie, because I don't know if you join how early you joined in the podcast, but I have a problem with how we have conceptualized ADD. And there are some psychiatrists out there, even some prominent ones. I don't consider myself a prominent psychiatrist, but there's some prominent ones, like someone who I do respect. He says some controversial things, but like I do respect him. His name is Dr. Nasir Gami, if you want to go look him up. So I'll throw back another thing for you to check out. I'll have to check out Roger McFillin. Thank you for that, Carrie. But Dr. Nasir Gami, I believe, I hope I don't offend him and butcher this. He gave a lecture once when I was a resident. I believe it's Nassir, and then I believe the last name is here. Let me double check for you so I get it right. And I do believe he has a podcast as well. But yeah, here it is. I shouldn't have doubted myself. It is. I'll put it in the chat. It's a worthwhile listen, and it's not a long episode. I do believe he put it. It's pretty old. I think he might have put it out there maybe a couple years ago, but he had a podcast episode, which got a lot of reactions actually. So, but he said something similar. I don't want to misquote him, but I believe I paraphrase, and I think he said, he just believes the entire construct and paradigm of ADD is a totally invalid construct, and kind of equated it to, we treat it as if it's a validated disease entity when it's an invalidated, not validated cluster of random symptoms that we put together and slapped a title on it. And look, to be fair, right? I think people can make that criticism of, many other psychiatric disorders, right? It's not like we have definitive ways of saying this exists, this doesn't, but he was just indicating that, he thinks that the paradigm itself and the entity itself is how we conceptualize it is hugely problematic, and believes because of that, even all of the research that we have, the research is basically research built off a false premise. So how do we even put faith in the research that's been kind of spouted out for the last few decades, when the entire construct of itself is not a very valid paradigm? And if you caught me a few minutes ago, you got a sense of what I was saying. I'm not going to rattle off every verbatim criteria for ADD from the DSM, but it's similar to the questions I asked in that example of reading off a survey. Like, do you have troubles focusing? Do you procrastinate a lot? Do you have trouble tracking conversations? Right? So no, that's very interesting. I'll have to check that out. But there are other psychiatrists who feel the same. And when they speak up, oof, Lashback is it's pretty big. Um, so back to my concept of the testing. So I do believe testing is helpful. Here's the problem though with testing. Here is the problem, and we'll end the testing part with this, is it's expensive and it's hard to access. I mean, if you were to check your Blue Cross or your Cigna or your Aetna or whatever, I wouldn't be surprised if you're still going to have an out-of-pocket patient responsibility portion that's pretty decent. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to take you a while to even find someone who's in network. A lot of these folks even want to just do cash only and stuff, right? So what are the wait times going to be to get in? Now let's throw out your insurance. Let's say you're someone who doesn't have insurance. Or let's say you're like many Americans who have piece of crap insurance, right? False insurance by name just to meet these requirements, but it's really crap coverage, right? Good luck. Good luck getting testing, right? So I will tell you right now, most Americans do not get testing. Most Americans do the paltry survey eyeball methodology method of getting it diagnosed. And again, I will get criticized by colleagues who say, no, you just don't have enough expertise. I've been diagnosing ADD for 10 years, 15 years. Yeah, I'm not doubting there are good ones, but I'm saying, sadly, I'm just going to say it right now. Most psychiatrists, I don't think are that great. I'd say there are very good ones. There are a lot that are better than me. I'm going to say, I just know the reality too. There are a bunch of crap psychiatrists out there. And trust me, they may not even be doing as good as just reading off a survey. They're just like, you're having problem focusing? Here's some Vyvanse. Oh, trust me, it happens. Okay? So it's a problem. Our diagnostic methodology sucks. Our access to more sophisticated diagnosing with neuropsych testing is so out of reach for most Americans. And then finally, what do many clinicians and patients do? They do the treat it to prove it methodology. Let's just treat it to see what happens. And that's also problematic. It is very problematic, guys. For several of you still listening here, it is problematic because here's the following truth, right? Giving someone Adderall or Vyvanse and then hearing back from them, oh my God, where has this been my whole life? I feel so much better. I'm not saying it's impossible, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's impossible to then ascertain some conclusions from that. But the problem is, I think there's this false notion that only those with ADD will truly feel better. And that's somehow a proof of concept that you felt improvement and that because of that, you must have ADD. I'm going to tell you this right now. We have a lot of literature. We have a lot of literature that suggests I give someone who does not have remotely close to having anything near ADD, and I give them Vyvanse, Adderall, Ritalin, they will perform better. I'm going to tell you right now. They're going to perform better on standardized testing. They're going to subjectively report that they feel better for the most, unless they're ridden with side effects. I'll give that caveat: worsening anxiety, insomnia, dry mouth, constipation. But side effects aside, as long as it's tolerable, a lot of folks are going to say they feel better. Back in the day, I don't have ADD. I tried some Adderall. Man, that was a great day. That was a great day. I said, wow, this lecture sucks. But you know what? I'm soaking every word in. My pupils were like this. I'm like, yep, this sucks. This is boring. But you know what? I hear every word this professor's saying. I'm going to pay attention, even though this sucks and this is boring. I was alert. I was attentive. I got a lot done that day, and I don't have ADD. So we can also create this false misattribution, self-fulfilling prophecy. I felt better, hence, thus, I must have ADD. We nailed it, Doc. Thank you so much for prescribing this for me. And we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it a lot because, again, it's not cool and not sexy to bring this up because it comes across as being overly critical. Stimulants have plenty of side effects. Stimulants can worsen anxiety. I will acquiesce. when we can appropriately reduce ADD symptoms in an ADD patient, someone with ADD, that in itself can reduce anxiety, right? So we got to have a balanced conversation. So it can help when appropriately given, but it can worsen anxiety in folks with ADD. It can worsen anxiety in those without ADD. It can cause insomnia, dry mouth, constipation, appetite suppression, weight loss, headaches. We don't even talk about the intermediate and long-term risks. There are cardiac risks. This is not opinion. This is not opinion. How many ADD advocacy websites list, stimulants and the cardiac risk down the road? It can strain the heart. There's evidence of causing, issues with, cardiac strain, cardiomyopathies, et cetera. I mean, there's problems. There's hypertension concerns. There's real cardiac risk with chronic long-term use. Yet we don't talk about it because, that's not cool. That's being a downer if we talk reality and we have a fair and balanced conversation. So there's concerns about misprescribing to misdiagnose patients who don't need it. There's even concern about when it's appropriately prescribed. Let's be real, all right? So our diagnostic methodology is piss poor. And then going back to the next topic, right, another problem is the paradigm itself. So going to Carrie's comment, the paradigm itself, I do question the paradigm. I do believe there are a cohort of folks out there who have this extreme level of inattention, working memory issues that can wax and wane and fluctuate, can get better during certain circumstances, during certain stress levels. Stimulants can dramatically improve them. But the way that we try to conceptualize it and define it is problematic. Do you procrastinate a lot? Do you have a hard time focusing on things you're not interested about? Do you have a hard time sitting still? Do you have a hard time relaxing? I mean, these are so nonspecific. I mean, it's a far cry from when folks are manic, floridly manic, and we could say, okay, you don't have cocaine in your system, you're not on speed, yet you look like this. You have bipolar disorder. We know what schizophrenia looks like. Nobody doubts that. When psychosis is florid, and we know it's not stemming from drugs, you have schizophrenia. We don't have those unique identifiers for ADD. That's the problem. That's the problem. So the construct itself is a problem. I do feel like we as a field need to better define this. The diagnostic methodology is piss poor. Better diagnostic tools are out of reach. So let's talk now. Let's get into the fun part. We'll wrap up, in the next 15, 20 minutes for those of you who can hang on. Forget my complaining and my soapboxing. I'm gonna put that aside. Let's do the fun stuff now. Let's follow the money. Let's follow the money. Just to prove to you, I am not a conspiracy theorist. There is social, this is going to, let me stop. After this sentence, I'm not going to sound like a conspiracy. I believe there's social engineering going on right now. I really do. I really believe there's kind of this like psyops, social engineering, direct to consumer marketing, healthcare journal research infiltration under the guise of science and research, really pushing an agenda. Funding, again, not the groups themselves, but unfortunately bias comes in when dollars flow in from profiteering industries that infiltrate and support certain advocacy groups. Follow the money, okay? So what do I mean by big business and follow the money? Put it this way. First, let's start with pharma. Let's talk then about even healthcare groups, hospitals, clinicians. And then let's even talk about some of the funny research and advocacy stuff. And then we'll wrap it up after that. And definitely want to hear your comments on this too. Let's think about the history of stimulant medications. Okay, and for those of you, if you were there for several episodes ago when I talked about direct to consumer marketing, right? Go back to that episode if you don't know what I'm talking about. But we did an episode on this live stream about direct to consumer advertising and some of the dangers about that. And we talked about the history of amphetamines and stimulants, right? Back in the 30s, even, stimulants were used for a lot of things. It was actually one of the first marketed antidepressants. Take this to perk you up. Take some methamphetamine, right? And I showed you those ads, those print ads that said, have your wife be happy, have her have dinner ready for you at home. She's going to clean up the entire house when you come home from work. Just give her some methamphetamine. Boom, right? We gave it to soldiers to perk them up. So they had to buy them from somewhere. We were giving it to soldiers to stay awake. We were giving it to housewives to lose weight, to be not depressed, to be more productive. Okay. Then later, there was concern about it being used for those purposes. And then it morphed, right? It stopped being used for depression. It then started catching on more for weight loss and weight loss supplements. And then again, they're like, when they started seeing, it's funny, right? Because that's where they started noticing cardiac concerns, cardiac risk factors. And then when that money pool dried up, well, what can we do with them now? You know what? We better really ramp up this ADHD narrative in society. And again, I'm not saying that this may not exist. I'm just saying there's an agenda by the industry to say, let's milk the hell out of this. And I'm not saying this is just for ADHD. We talked about in the previous episode about how the makers of sertraline or Zoloft back in the day, they were one of the best at inserting this narrative that you have a serotonin imbalance. We could just balance that serotonin, that chemical imbalance, you'll be happier, right? This has infiltrated so many fields of mental health, not just ADD, depression, anxiety, ADD, all these things. None of them are immune to this social engineering that's going on by big business. Okay? I showed you the ADHD ads that make parents feel insecure. Look at Johnny on his Adderall XR. He's so happy. Why does your little Jimmy not look like that? Right? Later on, atomoxetine, Strattera, made by Eli Lilly. They said, hey, we're not a stimulant. How are we going to compete with Adderall, Ritalin, etc.? Well, they said, you know what? Let's just really amp up adult ADHD. Look at the timelines. I want you to look at the timelines. For those of you who really care about this, I want you to go look at the timelines and look at where the literature about people having ADHD rampantly into adulthood started skyrocketing, all the journal articles. It was around the time that atomoxetine or Strattera was brought to market. And suddenly they said, look, hey, adults, don't you realize you've had ADHD all along? You don't want to take those scary stimulants, the Adderall and the, Ritalin, etc. And if anything, they played off the fears where some of these stimulants were still rather novel at the time. So you don't want to mess with those. You want to take a non-stimulant, atomoxetine, and you need it because look at all the evidence of all these folks who still have these problems in adulthood. And it was fascinating because earlier, prior to that, Strattera, atomoxetine, most of the journals and literature out there, most of them, supported the idea that most children with ADD did not exhibit full criteria ADD into adulthood. And that's why, even predating all of these pharmaceuticals of Adderall, Ritalin, that, many adults still found ways to live productive lives. I'm not saying that they were symptom-free or didn't have any distress. Please don't misinterpret me or misquote me. But that not all these adults had to be on stimulants, Ritalin, Vyvanse, Adderall, right? This notion then changed when the field of psychiatry, psychology, they're not innocent either, started pumping out more and more and more and more of these articles and evidence and research that, oh, we've been wrong this whole time. And how did the narrative just flipped, right? Most people still have just as much problem with their ADD in adulthood as they did in childhood. There's no, this whole idea of growing out of it or waxing and waning or fluctuating, remitting, BS. How dare you? How dare you? Right? Back in the day, I don't even know if he's a big deal anymore, right? What was his name? Some of you might know better than me, like folks like Carrie who listen to some of these podcasts. Like, was it Dr. Russell Barkley, PhD? So again, psychology, they're not immune to pharma either. And look, I'm no angel. I've told you even in our last episode when we were talking about S-ketamine and ketamine, I was on the Johnson & Johnson Speakers Bureau, even as recently as the past year in 2024. So I'm not coming across as sanctimonious, right? But I still try to use my brain from time to time. But, you know, he was a prominent, yeah, SNCS brings up as an adult, our support systems can change. That affects things too. And yeah, and that's right. And that's why I believe, that's why we do see some of these ups and downs, right? Versus this static course all the time. Dr. Barkley, PhD, psychologist, prominent, ADD advocate, researcher, basically doing a 180 saying, look, this whole time, the whole field got it wrong. Rates are much higher. If anything, we're underdiagnosing. How dare we even, suggest that we're over diagnosing, that there's a problem with over prescribing. Go Google it. I'm not saying Google is the truth, but go. I'm just saying do a search right now. For those of you who are listening right now, there's several viewers right now. Go look up Dr. Russell Barkley and type Dr. Russell Barkley and type Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly. And see what you come up with. See what you come up with. So one of the most prominent non-MD, they call them key opinion leaders, KOLs. I hate that term, key opinion leader, right? I don't even think he was shy about it, I think at one point, openly even kind of said like 8% of his, income at one point was just coming directly from Eli Lilly. And that wasn't even including speakers bureau gigs, that stuff that I've done before. And trust me, I know how much they pay for those. Sometimes you can get $3,000 a talk to give a dinner talk for an hour and a half. You get like $3,000 sometimes even more. Oh, it looks like so SNCS. I appreciate it. SNCS looks like they did an internet search, right? I'm telling you, it's not even hidden. This isn't even secret stuff. So again, I'm not making up this stuff about there is an agenda that even infiltrates research, healthcare research. Big dollars, big money. They pay key opinion leaders to influence the field, to pump out journal articles. You're paying for someone's name, someone who's already out there and made it. And trust me, I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. And when someone like Johnson & Johnson is willing to pay me, thousands of dollars in consulting fees and speakers fee, what do you think they pay someone who's actually well known and has like a name and some cachet of being affiliated with whatever, Yale University and the professor of blah, blah, blah? What do you think they're shelling out for actual like industry key opinion leaders? Fathom that, okay? I'm no one that works from home in a telehealth office that, yeah, I happened to do some research back in the day. That's where I had some connections. But what do you think they're willing to pay actual key opinion leaders in the year 2025 right now? there's a ton of money. So there's money that's infiltrating research. There's money from pharma socially engineering a narrative direct to consumer. And let's get into it. How about the clinicians themselves and healthcare companies themselves? They're not innocent. We as clinicians, we're not innocent. I didn't get the graphics ready in time, but you know what? Here, let me see. I'm gonna do this, finagle this real time right now. Let me do this right now. Excuse the clacking that I'm about to do. I'm gonna pull it up because this is too good. This is too good, guys. I gotta show you these. I'm gonna show you two things, so be patient with me for 1 second. Here's the first one. Sorry for the clunkiness because I'm doing this in real time. This company, so again, if you're part of this company, I'm just reading publicly known news. This isn't me making false accusations. This is literally from the DOJ. This is from the Department of Justice's website, guys. Okay. This is from the DOJ. Founder, CEO, clinical president of digital healthcare company. And this is referring to Done, D-O-N-E, Done Health. Arrested for $100 million Adderall distribution and healthcare fraud scheme. So go Google it yourself. Go on the DOJ's website. Telehealth company was arrested with their alleged participation in a scheme to distribute Adderall over the internet, conspire to commit healthcare fraud in connection with the submission of false and fraudulent claims for reimbursement for Adderall and other stimulants, and to obstruct justice. And essentially, I didn't post the entire article here. There was an infrastructure that was allegedly put in place to promote the prescribing of stimulants, allegedly setting up very rudimentary screeners like I was referring to show some semblance that they screen folks to then pressure and push their clinicians to just peddle stimulants over the internet and take advantage of some of the lax leniency that was done over the pandemic about controlled substances over telehealth. Okay. Did you see that? That's big money. That's big money. One more. Give me 1 second, guys. Let me pull this up since I didn't have a lot of prep time today. Do one more. Another fun, spicy one. Where's this one? Here we go. Some of you probably heard of this company, Cerebral, right? They don't advertise as much as they used to. For those of you who are in the know, you know what I'm saying. If you know, you know. For those of you who are hanging out on social media, on Twitter, on Insta, during the peak of the pandemic especially, rack your brains, take your memory lane back to peak pandemic when the quarantine was happening. Don't tell me you didn't see a social media ad for Cerebral somewhere on your social media feed. Struggling with ADD? Contact Cerebral. We'll mail you some Adderall, right? So, Cerebral, a digital mental health care provider that raised hundreds of millions of dollars during the coronavirus pandemic, implemented new measures aimed at boosting prescriptions in early 2021, according to federal regulators. The measures, which included metrics for tracking prescriptions to patients enrolled in a medication management plan after their first visit and stimulants for patients with ADHD, relied on relaxed telehealth prescribing rules intended to help patients access prescriptions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And now, as a result of that, they were fined and asked to pay back millions of dollars. I believe it was somewhere, don't quote me, on the realm of about $7 million. They apparently said that they can't even pay it all back, and they settled in some number in between. slap on the wrist for a company like that, honestly. Okay. And then you see the heavy advertising suddenly disappear, right? And I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get in hot water right now, but there's still companies that are doing this kind of stuff right now. Pushing the narrative. And if only those doctors in the past had just correctly diagnosed you with ADD, life would be so much better. Take a short survey and then we'll hook you up and we'll figure out a loophole to make sure you get your stimulant. And trust me, these companies are savvy. They know the loopholes. I've interviewed with some of them. I've interviewed with some, and then I ended up balking and turning down the opportunities because, well, I'm like, how do you guys handle this stimulant stuff? And I've had companies quote me. I kid you not. He said, well, are you comfortable with ADD, Dr. Kim, if you were going to work with us? I said, yeah, of course I'm comfortable. What do you mean? I've been working in psychiatry for 13 years. Why would you ask me that? Of course. Am I going to be seeing a lot, or like, what's your rate, of ADD cases in your caseload? Some of these companies have said 50%. I looked at that. I said, are you crazy? 50%, 50% of my caseload is going to be ADD. I just told you 1 in 9. And I know, look, when you go to a psych clinic, you get a skewed sample. It's not the general population, it's people seeking help. But don't tell me you go from 1 in 9 to 50. You can't make that leap, even in a skewed sample. You're telling me that knowingly, you're going to give stimulants to half the patients your clinicians are seeing. Give me an effing break. Give me an effing break. I said, hell no. I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to touch you with a 10-foot pole. Because you're going to end up like one of those companies that I posted right now in one of those graphics. You kidding me? Half your patients? I'm going to be prescribing half your patients stimulants? That's what you want me to do? To Snix's point, with a bunch of loopholes? Oh, and trust me, they milk the loopholes. And even when I directly ask them, I'm like, is that kosher? You get this long-winded song and dance talking in circles until you get tired of listening, and then they want you to just acquiesce and back off the question, right? It's in a gray zone. But they make it sound like you were just not in the know when you question it, right? And I screw this, man. I've worked too damn hard, and I got people relying on me. I'm not going to end up being a stimulant peddler. Okay, that's just not my deal. So I'm telling you from firsthand experience, not just from these new news articles. Companies like this are still doing this. Companies like this are recruiting physicians left and right, paying them very well. This is still happening out there, guys. So it's attacking us as a society from the pharma angle, the industry, healthcare companies themselves, clinicians themselves. Again, I'm not innocent and an angel. I'm just saying, but there is an industrial complex out there of clinicians, healthcare companies, pharma. Research has been infiltrated. Key opinion leaders are socially engineering some of this narrative. It's a problem. It's a problem. And I'll end with this. And again, I don't blame. They're trying from a hearted place. I'm going to be a little bit softer on this, but I even have some concerns with the social narrative being pushed by some of the advocacy groups. And I want to be careful. I'm all for advocacy. None of these groups are perfect, but I support NAMI. I support SAMHSA. I like what these ADD advocacy groups are doing, so don't get me wrong, but I do have a problem sometimes when people can't have adult conversations. And if you go look on some of these ADD advocacy groups, their websites, they'll always have in there, go to the FAQ section or about facts about ADD section. You're going to see repetitively a quote that says, you know, 90% of adults, of kids who have ADD, continue to struggle with, you know, ADD throughout their whole life as adults. Really, again, hammering home this adult ADD phenomenon. And I know the study that they're citing. I know the study. I've read it. I try my best to stay abreast and on top of some of this. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but they're citing this longitudinal study that was done. I believe one of the researchers' names was a very well-respected and well-renowned psychologist, Dr. Sibley, who I believe is based out of University of Washington, Seattle, but, you know, through the NIH. And it's funny because they cherry pick some of the research. They did a longitudinal study following kids who did get some treatment for their ADD. They were diagnosed as having ADD. And then they followed them periodically every so often, every few years. I'm not doing this summary justice here, to spot check for ongoing ADD. And what they wanted to establish was, they felt like, you know, doing one spot check at a later time to say they do or don't still meet criteria for ADD wasn't sufficient enough, right? So they wanted to check the course of ADD over multiple longitudinal points, which is noble, and it's difficult to do a study for that long. And then the endpoint was about 16 years after the fact, most of the participants ending at age like 25, I believe, if I'm remembering right. And their conclusion was, there was close to about 10% of those kids who, by the time at the end of the study, like basically were just in like full remission, meaning like they clearly, absolutely no argument, even from their panel of experts, no longer met the criteria for ADD at all. And that was established over multiple assessment points, not like a one-time thing, but numerous times in a row, they didn't meet criteria for ADD anymore. They said 10% showed a persistent, stable kind of display of ADD throughout, meaning at almost most of the time points, like they never really showed much remission or improvement. Like they just kind of statically had ADD throughout, even from beginning to the end point. Like they would meet criteria basically consistently. But then that left the vast majority of those in the middle where they said, well, you know, there's kind of a fluctuating course. There was a fluctuating course. Meaning at certain time points, they were in total remission. At other times, they were in partial remission. At other points, they met full criteria. So there was a fluctuation of symptoms. And let me see here. I'm gonna pull this up real quick. And what's interesting to me is the cherry picking and the selectivity, right? Because this is the final sentence at the conclusion of that actual study. Based off these findings, clinicians can communicate to families that most adolescents and young adults with ADHD, around 90%, experience at least intermittent relief from their ADHD symptoms over time that may be modulated by personal and life circumstances. So again, I'm not saying, they didn't say that 90% of them are cured. They're just saying 90% will have a waxing and waning course and will have times of improvement. And they were also very clear, 10% won't. They're just going to kind of have static symptoms of persistent ADHD or ADD throughout. So what's accurate is the study says about 90% will have at least residual symptoms of ADHD as a general statement, meaning some variation because of that fluctuation, and some of those will have static. So they're saying 90% will have 90% will have at least some residual waxing and waning symptoms of ADHD. Yet a lot of these advocacy groups kind of alter that statement and basically say 90% are just going to keep having problems forever, right? And so we're cherry picking what we want to present. Healthcare companies have an agenda to make money. Industry has an agenda to make money. Key opinion leaders are influenced by pharma dollars and industry agendas. Guys, And then to wrap it up, let's go back full circle. The diagnostic criteria and paradigm itself is problematic. I think we got to refine it. We don't have definitive genetic markers. The symptoms themselves are nonspecific and kind of laughable how nonspecific they are. Our survey inventories are nonspecific. Testing, which is somewhat better, is often inaccessible, too expensive. And to go all the way back to the beginning of our first statement, and now we're saying 1 out of 9 people have ADD. That is the concern in conclusion. We have all of these problems, all of these flaws, all of these issues, and we're okay with saying 1 out of 9 Americans are now going to have ADD. And again, let's roll with the narrative that most of these aren't going to outgrow or improve, etc. Like kind of like what I'm saying are posted on these websites, right? So we're saying 1 out of 9 of these kids, meaning 1 out of every 9 Americans in general, because they're going to become adults, right? 1 out of 9 are going to have ADD. So we're saying 1 out of 9 Americans just have ADD now. That's what we're saying. And that's where I have huge concerns. I know that not all 1 out of 9 are going to be on stimulants, but trust me, a large percentage are going to be on stimulants at some point or be on stimulants continuously. And again, to wrap up, am I vilifying stimulants? No. Am I saying that there aren't adults who genuinely struggle with inattention, executive dysfunction, at least for now, what we call and label it as ADD? No, I know they exist. And I know they can get better and benefit from appropriate treatment. I see a comment from SNICS. I feel as if I can't get anything done without arrow. Yeah, I believe you. I'm not disbelieving. And that's what I mean. I'm not saying those things, but can I believe that those things are true, but also say we got a problem on our hands? That's what I'm saying. Can we have an adult conversation? Can we have a mature, balanced conversation in society to make sure we're not creating a new monster and a new problem in our country? I think we already have a problem, and now we're stoking the flames, and we're going to pour gasoline on it until our field has a wake-up call. All right, guys, you can hit me up. Last minute rapid fire questions. We've gone over an hour. You can see how heated I get, how passionate I get with this. I lost track of time. We went even past hour. We're at an hour 20 minutes now. We're deep. So man, for those of you who stuck around, oh my gosh, I really do appreciate you guys stuck around. It's late. You guys stuck around for all this heated vitriol. Any last minute questions before we wrap up for tonight, guys? I appreciate you. Thank you again to SNICS, especially sticking it out, giving me some commentary towards the tail end here. All right, guys. But for those of you who are first timers, remember, we do Tuesday, Saturday nights. Vivek says, I was on olanzapine for 2 months and stopped abruptly. Started aripiprazole now, having both olanzapine and aripiprazole. Will I recover? Vivek, I'm not even sure what you're referring to. Recover from what exactly? But again, if you missed the beginning part of my stream today, I can't really get into customized personal medical advice to people. I'm not your actual physician. If you had a more general question, I could try to answer it more generally, but I can't really give direct medical advice. You got to speak with whoever's prescribing that for you to ask them more specifics, because I need a lot more context than that. But if you had a general question about the concepts of what you're talking about, let me know. So SNICS says, what are the effects of long-term stimulant use? It's a little bit variable. There are some cardiac risk factors. There are concerns of whether or not, it can lead to a risk factor for hypertension, risk factor for um, concerns about heart attack, just, overall heart attack, stroke risk, whether it contributes to cardiomyopathy. So there are definitely cardiac concerns, more as kind of your longer term risk with chronic exposure. I would say, issues while you're on them, especially if you're taking them chronically, weight loss is, especially for children, that's what we're very worried about. But even adults, I do see people with enough appetite suppression that it can lead to actual weight loss progressively. And some of the more, standard fare side effects, the dry mouth, constipation, headaches, anxiety, insomnia. Another concept is the concern about tolerance. And there's still a little bit of controversy about that to some degree. But what I do feel you can get a tolerance to, probably more specifically, I think there's debate still. It's not clear about the tolerance of like losing efficacy for the cognitive improvement, for patients with ADHD. There's still mixed literature on that. But what I do think more confidently there is some tolerance to is the wakefulness promoting component of stimulants. Because you will hear from patients, they'll say, oh, like it just doesn't hit me as hard anymore. But when you really kind of dig a little deeper, they're not necessarily even saying that like, oh, like I don't feel it's not helping me with my attention and concentration like it used to versus when I'm not taking it. But when you really dig deeper, they're saying, I miss that kind of like burst of energy and awakeness that kind of hits me. And that will then secondarily also contribute and help with productivity and getting things done, etc. And oftentimes people say, oh, it just, I miss that. And like, I don't get that kick it used to give me. It's not as much of a kick, or it doesn't kick in as effectively. And when you really get under that, I think what they're referring to oftentimes is that like wakefulness promoting component. And I do believe that more clearly than like whether or not there's loss of efficacy or effectiveness for the cognitive improvement. That's a little bit more murky, but I do believe you can also get a tolerance to the kind of wakefulness promoting component of stimulants. And I think in particular, especially those who don't have ADD, but are using these chronically, that really feels even that much more prominent, because that's essentially what they were really kind of gaining from it, at least most robustly and palpably from a physical perspective, is like, I can now pull an all-nighter, I can meet that corporate deadline and work until 3 a.m. to get this deadline done, etc. Right? So those are some of the things when you're using it at the time or kind of the longer term medical risks. Hopefully that helps answer some of that. So again, guys, thank you so much. We're going to wrap this up tonight, and I appreciate you as always. For those of you who haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, and we'll catch you this upcoming Saturday at 10:30 Central, 11:30 Eastern. Thank you again. Dr. Andrew Kim signing off for another episode of the Insomniacs Livestream. Catch you guys on the other side. Be safe, everyone. Have a good week.